Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I'm your host, David Beas with Cavalier Associates. And on this episode of Underwriting Shorts, we'll be diving into depression, anxiety, and bipolar syndrome. And joining me to discuss today is our Chief Underwriter, Ken Turscak. Ken, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here, David. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, look, let's jump right into it as we normally do. When you see treated and stable for depression or anxiety, what objective signals tip you from standard to preferred?
Well, you're really looking at a lot of things. Things as simple as when the depression and or the anxiety was diagnosed. You're looking at the medication or medications prescribed along with the corresponding dosages. You're looking at stability as indicated in follow-up from the proposed insured's medical caregivers. You're looking to make sure that the individual has routine and regular care and follow-up. But other factors include not only when diagnosed, but the age of diagnosis, any history of hospitalization, days off from work. You're looking at the whole picture. But those are that'll give you a good sampling of what you're looking at in order to determine, in order to determine, in order to assess the proposed insured.
Excellent. Appreciate that insight. And recently, we've seen more and more data come out around depression. I mean, anywhere from 13 to 20% of individuals reporting depression. You know, how how do you avoid over penalizing a condition that's super common while still, protecting the pool?
Well, I think a lot of it is, yeah. I've seen statistics upwards of 20%. So I mean, obviously that's a lot. So we're seeing this as a top three, maybe a top five scenario in underwriting. We see it every day, basically. So you avoid over penalizing by taking into account all of those same factors that we just discussed. Everything from the treatment to the stability to the medications needed to treat. You look at whether there may have been an acute cause for the depression, such as a death in the family, the loss of a job, divorce, illness, those very big life changing events. And you avoid penalizing by acknowledging, too, that hand in hand with what I just said, not all depressions are the same.
You're absolutely right. It isn't. I mean, we always have to, the devil's in the details, as they say, right, when we dive into the records. But, that said, how do you underwrite trajectory versus labels? What's that documentation you're looking for that really moves an offer?
Yeah, so by trajectory, we're talking about whether or not the proposed insured is getting better, whether the proposed insured is stable or even getting worse. So as for minimum documentation, there truly was a time, I mean, not long ago, whenever there was a mention of depression or anxiety, forget about it. We were getting APS records from everybody, their aunt, uncle, sister, and brother. You could be sure that there would be the request for APS records. But that's not necessarily the case any longer. If the individual has had stable and mild depression or anxiety and has been maintained on a low dose, let's say a low dose Prozac or a low dose Zoloft or a low dose Paxil, just to name a few, there's a number of carriers that may be able to go various preferred, standard plus preferred categories. But to demonstrate to underwriting that the depression is in fact, or the anxiety, is in fact mild, throw in a brief cover letter, paint the picture for them, try to avoid ordering a number of APSs. So, I mean, we always hear about cover memos, but it doesn't have to be a novel. It could be just a simple paragraph. I have a 42-year-old male, female, has been on low dose, named the drug for 5 years, has no loss of work. Just a simple couple sentences will normally do it. For those applicants where the anxiety or the depression are more than mild in nature, underwriters, of course, are typically going to want to see an APS or at least a comprehensive medical summary. They'll order a script check to verify the medications that the individual is on. So that it's pretty much as simple as that. For the more mild cases, try to paint the picture, may be able to get it through the process in a really fast fashion. The ones that are more severe, the ones that are on the individuals that are on multiple medications, we're going to be looking at full underwriting.
Yeah, I mean, we've even seen some go through the accelerated underwriting route, which is great. And then obviously we've seen the other side of it. So a little cover letter, a little story, a little contextualization really can move the ball for somebody. And look, that's your standard treatment, but we see a lot of cases come through where they have irregular treatment. They might be taking benzos regularly, alcohol use, and maybe they like to smoke a little weed every night to help them relax to go to sleep. When the rest of the picture looks solid, how are you treating that?
Well, just to be very, very straightforward, if the proposed insured, if the individual is self-medicating, we're going to call it plain and simple. Carriers, they take a hard stand on that. They're typically going to rate very conservatively or decline. And again, we're talking about self-medication, the individual's drinking daily, the individual's using marijuana daily, the individual, like you said, I've just named the infinite number of scenarios. Carriers do not want to see an individual treating thyself. They want to see the medical professional doing that. Now, there are exceptions to that, David. You mentioned marijuana. I mentioned marijuana as well. If there's a notation in there and the client is upfront about the use, there's an occasional use of marijuana for sleep, underwriters are going to be able to get past that. If they have a couple of beers on a weekend with a friend or a couple of drinks, carriers are going to get past that. The issues are going to be in the ones where the individuals are truly, truly treating themselves and they're using alcohol and or drugs on a very regular basis to control what typically can exacerbate the issue.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to marijuana, obviously having a little to relax is different than self-medicating. Maybe that's the right coaching way to put it. Excellent. Well, look, let's switch gears a little bit, talk about bipolar syndrome. Walk us through bipolar 1 versus bipolar 2. How is that viewed and which, kind of three facts really help upgrade an offer?
So yeah, bipolar 1, bipolar 2, they're in most ways. In most ways, they are very similar. And while they share those similarities, obviously, and that's why we're discussing it, there are some key differences as well. So some of those, and I'll just go right down the line with it. So manic episodes, prolonged manic episodes, you're going to see those more in bipolar 1, whereas in bipolar 2, you're going to see the hypomaniac episodes. So two opposites with that, with manic episodes. Age of onset, bipolar 1, you're going to typically see the onset at younger ages. Bipolar 2, a little bit later in life. Prevalence of psychosis is going to be much higher in bipolar 1 than in bipolar 2. Severity of depressive episodes, you're going to see less severe depressive episodes in bipolar 1 versus more severe in bipolar 2. And as far as treatment goes, both of them are going to be treated with antipsychotics and various mood stabilizers. Now, having said all of that, even though there are some differences, and some of those differences may even be substantial, the more widely utilized reinsurance and the proprietary carrier underwriting manuals, most of them actually treat them the same. They don't distinguish necessarily between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Some do, but more than half, I would say, do not. So keep that in mind too. When you come to us with a question, please bring those questions to us, by the way, when you do have a case of bipolar 1 and or bipolar 2, because we see these on a very regular basis. And there are some carriers who really do treat differently. So where one carrier may be 2 to 4 tables with a mild bipolar, we may be able to find a standard with another. So bring those to us again, because there really are some variances.
You can't say devil in the details enough there. Let's move into one. This is the real coaching part of this, right? This is a field underwriting fix. Is look, if an advisor wants to put together a really killer cover letter, right? Whether it's depression, anxiety, bipolar, right across the board here, what are kind of like 5 bullet points that you would say, hey, look, we definitely want to have these in the cover letter? Also, what would be one thing that you never want to include in the cover letter? And now you're going to answer this question knowing full well that, you and your team are going to help advisors kind of, put a cover letter together. But what are the 5 things that you're really looking for? And the one thing that you'd say you really want to avoid this one?
Well, what you want to do is you want to start by emphasizing, if in fact the individual is stable, you want to emphasize the stability of the anxiety, of the depression. they're going to want to know when diagnosed. And when I say when diagnosed, 2 months ago is not a positive in this case. You want to see the most favorable offers are going to result in stability with somebody who's been documented to been stable, say at least a couple, 3 years minimum. So, if they've been on a low dose, again, I said before, Prozac, for example, Zoloft for 3, 4, 5 years, that's fine, indicated. They've been stable, it's been this dosage, it's not changing every 3 weeks, that kind of thing. Well, that leads us into number two. If they have not had a lot of adjustments, you want to emphasize that. You don't want to emphasize that they're changing it every other day, every other time they go to the doctor. If the individual has been maintained on a low dose drug for a number of years, that is very much a positive. So please include that. If the individual's in an older age, and when I say older age in this case, I'm not talking about 50 or 60, but once you hit say over 35, over 40, those tend to be viewed more favorably as well versus the younger ages. In this case, I'm referring to younger ages as somebody in their 20s or early 30s. Emphasize their lifestyle. When I say lifestyle, I'm talking about they work full time, they're successful, whatever they are, teacher, lawyer, doctor, whatever they are. I mean, if employment is stable, they're not missing a lot of work, anything like that, emphasize that. You can go down the list. There are so many things that you can include in a cover memo to indicate stability, to be able to aim for the most favorable offer. And there's multiple right there. But, obviously, I'm not going to sit here and state the obvious other than to say the ones that are going to require an APS, you don't want to emphasize what they're already going to see in the APS if it's not necessarily a positive. I'm not saying, I'm not talking about disclosure and non-disclosure. I'm just saying emphasize the positive, and then the rest can be underwritten during the course of the process.
Don't tell somebody how to think about it, and remember, we're also trying to get you insurance versus not. So
Correct.
maybe that's a good way to
Put in the most
think about that one.
You're not talking about non-disclosure, you're just talking about trying to put something in the most favorable packaging and positioning in the most favorable light possible.
Excellent. Well, Ken, thank you for that information there. Thanks for going through those questions. I want to move to a new round that we're introducing here on Underwriting Shorts, and it's called our lightning cases. So I've concocted 3 case studies for Ken to review. And here we go. Case 1, Ken. We're going to start easy and we're going to work our way up here. Mild depression, right? So let's say we have a 35-year-old female, mild depression, takes 10 milligrams of Lexapro daily, no hospitalizations, sees her therapist quarterly, runs marathons, steady career. What offer do you see on a case like this?
Yes, and by the way, these questions for me to analyze prior to our session here were given to me by David about 30 seconds ago. So we're really gonna have some fun here. No, David, that's actually a pretty straightforward one, and I do agree. We're progressing in difficulty. So this one, young, but still 35, young, mild depression, low dose Lexapro, very, very no issues, runs marathons, so on and so forth. Here we're going to have preferred classes with most carriers, some carriers best classes. Again, because there is variance with the carriers when it comes to anxiety and depression, you may want to bring these to us ahead of time, even just to give us as much of the fact pattern as you can. But generally speaking, you're going to have preferred classes with the overwhelming majority of insurance companies with that fact.
All right, well, let's step it up. And yeah, we like to keep you on your toes here. So depression and cannabis. So here we go. 29-year-old male diagnosed with depression 5 years ago, takes Zoloft 50 milligrams daily, sees his primary care physician twice a year, reports nightly cannabis use to help with sleep, but otherwise no alcohol misuse, stable job, no suicide history. How does the cannabis here shift your view? Preferred, standard, or something harsher?
Yeah, this is a good one. You have a couple of wrenches that you threw into this one. Number one, they're 29, so that's still on the younger side with this scenario. They're using marijuana daily. Is the marijuana prescribed or is the marijuana recreational? If the marijuana is prescribed, we're going to have some options. We will have some options if the individual is actually being prescribed the marijuana. If it's not, if it's recreational daily use, we're going to be limited. Number one, just because of the daily use of recreational marijuana, we're going to be limited to a couple, three carriers because of the daily use coupled with his age. And so even from there, we're going to be looking at a rating for both the daily use coupled with the depression. So to kind of sum it up and to clarify it, if it's prescribed marijuana, we're going to have a much better opportunity for a more favorable offer than if it's recreational daily use. Because with recreational daily use, with that history, we're going to run into a lot of declines. And if we do have some success, it's going to be with a very limited number of carriers. And when I say very limited, it's going to be one or two, and we'll be looking at a rating. That, I think that sums it up, David, as far as that scenario goes.
All right. That one is a tricky one. All right. Last one. Here we go. 46-year-old female, bipolar 1, hospitalized once for mania 12 years ago, fully compliant on lithium since then, clean labs, highly successful executive with no recent episodes.
Yep.
One past suicide attempt in her 20s, but 20 plus years of stability since. Do you underwrite her based on long-term success story, or does that single old red flag still dominate the file?
No, those are both dated. The suicide attempt was, the individual was young. It was 2 decades ago, and there has been no subsequent attempts. We can get past that. Same with the manic episode that required hospitalization. That was over a decade ago. Nothing since. So it looks like they found they found the correct drug and dosage to maintain the individual. But it does look to be a little bit more than mild. So we're going to look at this, probably categorize it more in the mild to moderate range, which is fine. We'll be able to find an offer, but probably more in that 2 to 4 table range. So again, we could find an offer, but it's probably going to be with a low end substandard with a couple of companies.
Excellent. Well, Ken, thank you for enjoying with me these 3 case examples. I appreciate it. Again, you had about 30 seconds prior to this call to take a look at these. So I love your on the spotness, if you will, on these. And again, if you have any cases you'd like to discuss with Ken, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email me, you can DM me here on LinkedIn, and we look forward to working with you soon. Ken, thank you again for joining.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.